Welcome to the Australian Centre for Entrepreneurship Research here at QUT and today's research seminar presentation. My name's Evan Douglas and I'm pleased to introduce the speaker today. He's my good colleague and friend, Per Davidsson. As you will know, Per has a distinguished publication record with over 34,000 citations, causing citation envy for the rest of us. Per has mentored many doctoral candidates and indeed all his colleagues, including myself, and for this was recognised with the Mentor Award from the Entrepreneurship Division of the Academy of Management in 2013. More recently, and at an even higher level, he was inducted into the 21st Century Entrepreneurship Research Fellows, which is a select group of only 15 scholars who've been honoured for advancing entrepreneurship research worldwide. Of course, there's much more one could say, but with no further ado, here is Per Davidsson.
Okay, thank you. So you now have the PowerPoint presentation on your screens, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And if I click it, you now have a new screen.
We now have your first screen, I think.
Yes. Okay. Good. Okay, so thank you. Welcome, everyone. I should say to begin with that this will not be exclusively about COVID-19, so just so you're prepared for that. I start with this. About a year ago, I sent this info publication guidepost, Look Out, See Change Ahead, a short piece for Academy of Management Discoveries, where I argue that research in entrepreneurship and strategy is far too much focused on the entrepreneurial agent, and we don't look enough at the force of environmental changes in shaping entrepreneurial and strategic endeavors. And little did I know at the time what a stark reminder of this we would now get in the form of COVID-19, which has enormous influence on business. Most of it negative, of course. Many businesses are through hard times, but like any environmental change, it also creates opportunities for new business to establish themselves or to grow. And this is a theme that I have been interested in recent years and done some work with, together with Friedrich von Briel and Jan Recke. And we call this external enablers, significant environmental changes that I define it in this way in my 2015 paper in JBV. An external enabler is a distinct external circumstance that have the potential has the potential of playing an essential role in eliciting and or enabling a variety of entrepreneurial endeavors by several potential actors. So it's an aggregate level phenomenon. For example, technological change, regulatory change, demographic, sociocultural, macroeconomic, political, and natural environmental changes. So these are things that happen independent of the focal entrepreneurial agent. And in further work, we have emphasized that changes to the environment are the clearest cases here. And because changes disrupt and stir the pot in the economic system, it is a safe assumption that every such change has the potential of making it, that there are some conceivable ventures that could benefit from this change to some degree, regardless of whether the change overall is for the better or the worse for society and for the economy. With COVID-19, I think the first examples of entrepreneurial responses I saw was some appalling attempts at arbitrage entrepreneurship and toilet paper on eBay and Gumtree and the like. But you also have startups that, for example, sanitize handrails with UV light that benefit from this. The big behemoths have vastly increasing demand for what we're doing just now. It supercharges digitalization. in China, even in Germany now. The Germans have been very conservative with online banking, and now finally they are going for that, and they're not even allowed to buy anything cash because of the risk of further spread. So you have a lot of apps related directly to the pandemic. You have technological solutions to the pandemic. Even the sex tech industry is flourishing as a result of COVID-19. Of course, you have the scammers, but you also have a lot of, and you will have, I'm sure, a lot of social entrepreneurship response to all the negative outcomes of or consequences of COVID-19 and the follow-on behavioral changes and the regulatory changes that hamper the economy. While I was doing this presentation, I got this email from some hopeful distributor of infrared thermometers. Could be mine for 159 plus GST. Many of you may have been working from home, and you may have bought yourself an office chair. These kinds of products sell a lot because of the pandemic. Smart entrepreneurs, they are sensitive to these kinds of changes. This is Rod Brooks. He is an Australian robotics professor at MIT, or was. He has instead become a robotics entrepreneur. And if you're an entrepreneur in that industry, then of course, new technology is very important. Even if you are a professor, it's likely that most of the new knowledge, the new technology is developed by someone else, not yourself. So it is an external enabler. When he was visiting us a couple of years ago, he did not talk much about that, but he did talk about this. This is the demographic development in China, and as you can see, it gets a bit narrow at the bottom. There are fewer people in the younger generations. What that means is that there won't be enough people to fill those mega factories. And by the way, there has been quite a bit of socio-economic development in China as well. So these young people don't really see their future in that factory anyway. And that means a spike in demand for industrial robots. He also talked about the demographic development in Japan, which is even more extreme. If you look at the projection for 2060 there, you see that a very small young generation is going to carry the burden of an increasingly geriatric population, if you like. What that means is that whether we like it or not, there will be a need for robotic solutions in care for the elderly, because there just won't be enough people to do all that work. So demographic and socio-economic shifts are important. He also talked about 9/11. He talked about Fukushima. He talked about the war in Afghanistan, where these are tough environments where you rather not have humans work and where robots can do a lot of work instead. He also talked about cleaning up the plastic pollution in our oceans as a possible future project. So even natural and man-made disasters like COVID-19, if you want to call it natural or man-made, there are some different opinions there. I'm leaning in the natural direction. Can be an external enabler. And there is some research on this. We're currently conducting a review of prior research of this nature that looks at environmental changes and how that has had a positive influence on new venturing. Across 55 journals, this is the 50 plus 5 more entrepreneurship journals, we only found 83 qualifying papers over 20 years, so it's not a big literature. We also see that most of them are phenomenon focused or eclectic. Eclectic is when you pick little, phenomenon focuses are label for atheoretical. Eclectic is you pick up pieces here and there from various theoretical perspectives. The only perspective that is recurring in is institutional theory, but not all environmental changes are institutional in nature. And other theoretical perspectives have been implied, but they are typically one-offs. So we thought that it may be useful to develop a theoretical framework that can serve as guidance and an integrative force for this type of research. And this is work I've done together with Jan Recker and Frederick von Brielen, which is published in Academy of Management Perspectives. So in this framework, yes, we realize that there is no entrepreneurship without the agent, but that is not the main focus in this framework. That knowledge we have about difference across agents, that is something you can plug into this. We also know that context characteristics, stable context characteristics are important, and that is also something we know about and that we can plug into this, but it is not the main focus in our framework. We know that different types of environmental change, technological, regulatory, demographic, sociocultural, macroeconomic, political, natural, environmental, and there may be more. We don't focus so much on single or the various types. You have pestle and steep and all those things for that. So instead of dividing them by type, we look what kind of commonalities and difference do you have within and across those types. And then we look at characteristics. So these are characteristics of the changes themselves. And we talk about scope, the magnitude of the change along different dimensions, spatial, temporal, sectoral, socio-demographic. We talk about the onset, whether it is sudden and unpredictable, or if it is gradual and somewhat predictable, right? Those differences have strategic implications. Who is going to be able and willing to act on those changes? Then we talk about mechanisms. These are the specific ways in which individual ventures can benefit from the change. And I'll get back to this. So there's a range of different types of benefits that you can get from the change and apply in your venture. And those mechanisms themselves have characteristics. They vary in opacity. Are they easy or difficult for anyone to identify? Do you need particular knowledge? Do you need particular creative ability to see the potential? And they vary in agency intensity. Is this a windfall like the office chairs? If you're already selling office chairs, the demand increases whether you do anything or not, right? Whereas others may require a lot of hard work and resource investments in order to be realized. And we talk about roles, that this change can be have a triggering role. It is because of the change that you start a new venture. It can have an outcome enhancing role, whether or not it was a trigger, like with the office chairs, that you sell more, make more profits. Without this was being the reason, the COVID-19 was not the reason that you started to sell office chairs in the first place. And then it can have a shaping role. The change can shape the product or service. So the product or service responds to the change, or it can change the ventures, like COVID-19 can change business models to more online and distance formats. And it can change the process of venture creation. For example, 3D printing has sped up significantly the creation process and made it less expensive for hardware manufacturers. COVID-19 may also have sped up the process in some cases, because we see that some things change very, very quickly under those circumstances, and regulators may be willing to allow that to happen as well. So if we look at scope here, COVID-19 has a very wide-reaching spatial scope. Most countries are or will be significantly influenced by this. It also have a broad sectoral scope. I didn't put it at the very top because it may not act as an enabler for any ventures in some sectors, but whether or not it's bad news for the sector as a whole, it will open up opportunities in many sectors. Then if you look at the temporal scope, then we think and hope that this will be an environmental change of relatively limited temporal scope. So it's far to the left there. And socio-demographic scope, maybe I should put it, should have put it higher. It influences most types of people, but it influences younger people less, both the direct health consequences, but also younger people are more attuned with sort of an online life already. So there's less of a behavioral change triggered by the change there. In terms of onset, this is interesting because the onset of COVID-19, of course, was very unpredictable and sudden in China. But you can't argue that it was totally unpredictable in other countries. And the later the onset comes in a particular country, the more preparedness there is. So this is the fact that this varies is a research opportunity. It is also something that can be you can use real world data about what kind of entrepreneurial initiatives happened in different countries at different times. You can also use it in scenario experiments with varying predictability and suddenness characteristics. The suddenness and unpredictability is also partly in the eye of the beholder, and that means that those that are more in the know can. So do you have a different screen now? Do I have to change?
No, we've still got the COVID-19 question mark in the middle.
Okay, let me see if I can stop share and share something else. So do you have a different screen now?
We got Trump.
You have Trump, okay, good. He said no one knew, right?
I don't have any sound of that.
Oh, sorry. So you didn't get the sound?
No, I didn't get the sound.
Okay, well then no participants got the sound then.
Run it again.
Yeah, well.
Per, I think you might find it's because your earphones are plugged in, and it's.
Okay. So it was first Trump saying that no one knew that there would be a pandemic of these proportions, and then there was Obama 5 years earlier warning about exactly this and how we needed to invest in preparedness of this, not just in the US but globally. The predictability is something that can be strategically used, right? So mechanisms are they are limited by the nature of the enabler. You can't get just any mechanisms out of any enabler, but they are manifested on the venture level. So not all ventures get the same benefits out of the same environmental change, right? And mechanisms specify the cause-effect relationships. How exactly is this change beneficial to the venture? So what we call mechanisms describe what benefits particular new ventures can derive from a particular enabler. And we have a range of mechanisms. Compression, something saves time. Conservation, it saves resources. Resource expansion, it makes more resources available. Resource substitution, it allows replacing a resource with an alternative resource. Demand expansion, it increases demand at a given price and functionality. Demand substitution, It shifts demand towards our product rather than a competitor's product because that one gets less popular or because ours is seen as more legitimate than before. Generation allows new features and functionality, mostly related to technological enablers, but to some extent also regulatory enablers can lead to that. Combination is about leveraging existing capacity, as with connecting to platforms, for example. Enclosing facilitates value appropriation so that you can keep more of the value you create. Legitimation and uncertainty reductions are intermediate and mechanisms that can lead to, for example, increased resources or increased demand. So these are not mutually exclusive mechanisms. So there is a range of different things in which external changes can help. And with COVID-19, the most obvious mechanism is demand expansion or demand creation. So there's certain products and services that are in high demand because of this pandemic. And demand substitution, that there's more, people spend more of certain things and less on others. But equally important also is resource expansion. When a lot of other businesses run into trouble, then there is human resources and physical resources, premises and machinery and so forth that becomes available for businesses to acquire at relatively low cost. When the economy is running at full capacity, it's very difficult for a resource-starved young poor venture to get the resources they would like to have. When recession strikes, then those resources become more available. This is very similar to a completely different historical enabler, namely the temperance movement, which led to the social-cultural change that led to regulatory change with prohibition. So this did not only lead to the demise of breweries and distilleries, it also led to a boom in creation and growth of soft drink companies. And why is that, would you say? Well, the first thing is demand substitution, of course. You need to drink something, but not all the purpose of alcohol consumption is easily substituted with soft drinks. So that is not the only reason. So the resource expansion was also very important here, that you have lots of people and premises and machinery that was already up to speed for very similar purposes and now available at low cost for new actors. You can also talk about this in terms of conservation. It costs less, so that is less monetary outlay. And legitimation, delegitimation of alcoholic beverages and increased legitimation of drinking soft drinks. Right? A similar change we see today is the rise of veganism, which is not, it affects a lot of food products for home and in restaurants, but also cosmetics, clothes, footwear, books and magazines, travel, hospitality. So there's a lot that gets influenced by this social-cultural change. The characteristics of mechanism are also important. Opacity. Is it easy for just anyone to see how you can benefit from those changes, or does it require specialized knowledge? Agency intensity. Is this something that anyone would jump on, or is this only for those who are willing to make the effort, willing to take the risk, and so forth? Typically, mechanisms that have higher opacity and higher intensity, they're more risky, they're more costly, but also a better basis for a strategic advantage in the long run. Controllability, we're adding this mechanism now. It's not in the framework article. So is this mechanism something you control, or is it sort of controlled by external forces? That also has implication for how you can use it strategically. So smart entrepreneurs who see beyond the most obvious, they will likely find other mechanisms than just direct demand expansion and resource expansion associated with COVID-19, the regulatory changes and the sociocultural behavioral changes that follow in its wake. Just to illustrate here, compression and conservation mechanism, I talked about 3D printing, a blessing for hardware startups. This used to be very expensive and so and take a long time to develop physical products. So with this technology, you can save a lot of money and time in developing prototypes and the venture creation process. Generation and combination mechanism, you have seen all those electric scooters, not least in Brisbane. Based on battery technology, you can now make lighter scooters that can run for a longer time, a longer range, much more so than you could 10 years ago. So that is new product features that just weren't possible. These things also benefit from the fact that we all have a smartphone in our pocket. So you can find the scooters on your smartphone, you pay through your smartphone, you tell when you park that the travel is over now. You can, if you don't see the scooter, you can call for it, so it makes a sound, so you find it, and you pay for the ride through your phone as well. So that is a combination mechanism. You leverage this capacity that is already there in the established smartphone technology. So if we come to roles of COVID-19, triggering role, for sure, there is a lot of new activity that is a direct response either to the health crisis or to the behavioral changes that follows from COVID-19. Product shaping, yes, as well. Most of those ventures would sell a product or many of them would, especially those that address the health crisis directly, they would sell a product or service that is related, that is created, that wouldn't have been created without the presence of COVID-19. Probably in some cases that the presence of COVID-19 may make it possible, for example, to do things faster than it would otherwise be possible to do. It may also be venture shaping, like I alluded to before, that you go more online, and once you have started to do that, you realize that your employees and full-time and part-time helpers, they don't need to be physically present in the same town or same country, so it pushes venture business models in this direction as well. And then you have outcome enhancing. Yes, for those that face increasing demand in this situation, they both can sell more and they can sell at better margins in this situation. So you have all those roles represented among ventures that are started in response to COVID-19. So I told you we're doing a review of related research here, and when we go through what has already been done, we also see some opportunities in what one can do in future research on these important things related to COVID-19 or other environmental changes. First, of course, apply our framework. This framework gives a sort of provides concepts to give direction to a study of this kind. It invites you to look in more detail at what are the benefits that the change brings beyond what is done in opportunity identification research. You just ask people, to what extent is this an attractive opportunity? Instead, you can in such research ask for what specific mechanisms do different types of actors, for example, novice and more experienced entrepreneurs, see in a change. You can do systematic variation and comparison of enablers with varying scope and varying onset. And that hasn't really been done in a systematic fashion. So our framework can integrate those kinds of efforts. There is a need to develop theory about direct and agent-induced influence of external enablers. Like I said before, most of the research is phenomenon-focused or eclectic in its theory use, or it uses institutional theory, which cannot really capture all types of change, and which may not be the ideal theoretical framework for deviating non-conforming entrepreneurial initiatives in the first place. So the external enabler framework is not a theory, it's a conceptual framework, but it can be used in developing actual theory about how external enablers can be strategically used by entrepreneurs and strategists. Attend to varying onset and evolution of external enablers. One fascinating finding in the review is that we do not find a single example of a study of entrepreneurship in response to demographic change. And as my robotics example said earlier, there are certainly smart entrepreneurs who observe that this can be a basis for new products and new markets and so forth. By the way, the young lady up in the corners is Ji-Young Kim. She is one of my doctoral students, and she is doing her PhD in this area and is the first author of the literature review we're working on. We also only found 2 and 3 examples among the 83 studies across the 55 journals over 20 years, 2 and 3 respectively, that looked at the consequences of varying gradualness and varying predictability of environmental changes. And this is clearly something that is teach and learnable strategic knowledge that we can develop. As you can see, what has been studied most are regulative and technological changes. Technological changes also, you also find much more of that in other journals outside of the set of FT50 and our entrepreneurship journals. So that is sort of underrepresented here. Regulative changes, there are those regulations that are changed in order to stimulate entrepreneurship. To study those and find that they actually work, well, that needs to be done, but it is not the most interesting research. More interesting is regulatory change that is done for some other purpose, and as a side effect, it also stimulates entrepreneurship of a particular kind. That's a fascinating type of study. Also strategically important and teach and learnable, I would argue, is variance in opacity and agency intensity and controllability of entrepreneurial enabler mechanisms. Here we also find very low frequencies in past research. There hasn't really been concepts to capture this. The notion of agency intensity was introduced by Ramoglu and Tsang in AMR in a slightly different context, but I borrowed it from there. And opacity is something we came up with ourselves. There is research. I mean, we have those 7 cases. My favorite study in this category is Gregoire and Shepard's 2012 article in Academy of Management Journal. Something that one can do is to start from a known surge in venturing activity in some area, and then look for what are the external circumstances that has allowed this to happen, and what can we learn from that. And that's interesting too. If you start at that end, then you are going to look at different enablers. Whereas in the case of the temperance movement, the study started with the temperance movement. So therefore it was sort of blinded to other types of changes that also drove this development. So we have some example here. Together with my colleagues, we looked at IT hardware and found how a range of different digital technologies had enabled different stages of the new venture creation process. And this could explain the surge we've seen in IT hardware, independent startups in IT hardware. The soft drink boom, if we take this lens on, well, then you see that, okay, the sociocultural change in terms of the temperance movement and the regulatory change it made was certainly the most important factor here, but there were other factors as well. Electric refrigeration boomed in this period, and that makes sugar water more attractive in certain parts of the world and certain times of the year when you can have it cool. So that's a combination mechanism, by the way. And you had an economic boom during the 1920s with the growing middle class and more discretionary income. So you could use the soft drink as a treat to yourself or to your children in a way that hadn't been the case before. With e-scooter rentals, if you look into this, there's a combination of technological, natural, environmental, sociocultural, regulatory, demographic, and infrastructural changes that have helped this phenomenon to happen. Not that I think that they're ever going to be very profitable or live up to the exaggerated valuations, but it's been a boom for those who are manufacturers of scooters. I think they are raking in the money. With COVID-19, you see a natural environmental change combined with regulatory change, lockdowns and so forth, and stimulation packages. And you have sociocultural change and behavioral changes that may be lasting. So in that sense, the temporal scope of COVID-19 isn't that short. And if you combine this with new technologies that already have happened, especially digital technologies, there is a lot that can happen in that combination that can be an interesting basis for study. So that was what I was intending to present. So thank you all for participating, and if you come up with some further questions or brilliant idea, you can always email me, and I might come back to you.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Leaving the building.
Bye.
Bye.